The rain had turned the city into a blur of headlights and shattered reflections on the pavement. Sophie Lane shoved her frozen fingers deeper into the pockets of her thin coat and kept walking, ignoring the way her toes had gone numb hours ago. It had been a long day, one of many since she'd lost her nursing job 3 months ago. Her phone buzzed in her back pocket. She slipped it out, shielding it from the rain beneath a gas station awning. Email notification. Subject, surrogacy opportunity, high compensation. Sophie narrowed her eyes. Probably another scam. She clicked it anyway. Seeking a healthy, emotionally stable woman to carry a child via surrogacy. Confidential arrangement. 6-figure compensation. Full medical coverage, housing, and stipend provided. Must be between 21 to 35, non-smoker, no major health conditions. Background check required. Contact only if serious. At the bottom was a simple address in downtown Manhattan and a contact email, a.wolf@exclusivearrangements.org. She stared at the message. Her stomach growled, loudly. The shelter's dinner line would close soon. She had enough change for coffee, maybe a stale bagel if she was lucky. She thought of her dwindling savings, the unanswered job applications, and the constant fear curling in her belly like something wild. She was 28. No health issues. No addictions. Just a woman with no family left, no money, and nowhere else to turn. And she'd always wanted to be a mother someday. Just, not like this. The office was stark, the walls painted in soft grays, the air thick with silence. A woman with severe cheekbones and a navy pencil skirt greeted Sophie with a practiced smile. "You're early," she said. "Mr. Wolf appreciates punctuality." Thanks," Sophie stammered, brushing wet hair from her forehead. She had pulled on the cleanest clothes she owned, black slacks, a fitted coat, but she still felt wildly out of place. "Please follow me." The woman led her down a quiet hallway and opened a door into a large study. The room was dimly lit, lined with bookshelves, and in front of the tall window sat a man in a wheelchair, turned slightly away from the door. He was younger than she expected. Maybe mid-30s, lean, with dark, thick hair, and a sharp jawline. His hands rested lightly on the wheels of his chair, motionless. "Mr. Wolf," the assistant said. "Leave us," he replied without turning. Sophie stepped into the room, suddenly aware of every sound, her breath, the soft click of the door behind her, the faint hum of the city beyond the rain-smeared windows. "I didn't think you'd be the one interviewing me," she said, instantly regretting how casual it sounded. His chair turned slowly. Their eyes met. Gray. His eyes were a stormy kind of gray, like the sky before a thunderclap. Cold, unreadable. "I don't like intermediaries," he said. "This arrangement is personal." She nodded. "Okay. You've read the terms?" "Yes. But I had questions, like..." "Why?" "I don't want a relationship," he interrupted. "I don't want to co-parent. You carry the children. You'll be provided with a private residence, security, full medical oversight. When they're born, I raise them. You disappear." Sophie blinked. "Disappear?" "Metaphorically," he said. "There's a severance. Legal documents. Confidentiality clauses. You'll be compensated. And the twins?" He arched an eyebrow. "You read that part?" "Yes. I want 2. 1 surrogate cycle. Twins, if possible. Embryo transfer. It increases the odds. I've never done this before. I'm aware." Silence stretched. "Why me?" she asked. He turned slightly, looking past her. "Your file said you're healthy, intelligent, and discreet. You're not desperate for attention. No social media footprint. No family ties. You have medical training, which is a plus. Most importantly, you applied. Her cheeks flushed. I didn't apply. I just opened the email. And then showed up, he replied coolly. That tells me you're open. Or desperate. The way he said it, so detached, made her want to leave. But something in his tone wasn't cruelty. It was protection. Like he had a wall so thick even his voice couldn't climb over it. I am desperate, she said finally. But I'm also serious. I won't screw this up. His gaze flicked down, briefly, to her stomach. Then you'll sign the contract today. Sophie wasn't sure what she expected, maybe a flurry of paperwork, maybe more questions. But Alexander simply turned his chair back to face the window, like the conversation was over. A pause. Then, quietly, you'll be contacted by a legal team by tomorrow. A driver will bring you back here in 2 days. Once the papers are signed, you'll be moved to the house. Medical procedures begin shortly after. Wait, Sophie said, voice catching. Just like that? He didn't look at her. You agreed. Yes, but I thought I'd have time to think, maybe. Or at least, meet the doctor. Now he turned back. Not irritated, but coolly curious. You're having second thoughts. No, she replied, perhaps too quickly. It's just, this is a huge decision. He studied her like she was a puzzle. You want to be convinced. Sophie folded her arms. I want to feel like a person in this, not a walking incubator. Alexander gave the ghost of a smile. You're the first one who said that. Is that supposed to reassure me? No, he said. But it tells me something. You're not afraid of me. That made her blink. Should I be? He wheeled forward slowly, just a few inches, as if testing her reaction. Most people are. They see the money and forget there's a man behind it. A broken one. Sophie swallowed. I see you. He froze. A beat of silence stretched between them, dense and uncertain. Then, briskly, he said, you'll be escorted out now. Expect a call in the morning. And just like that, it was over. 2 days later. The Wolf estate was nothing like Sophie imagined. Nestled on the edge of Long Island, the mansion rose from the ground like something out of a dream, or a movie set. Tall, modern, and bathed in morning light, it didn't look like the home of a lonely billionaire. It looked like a fortress. The car, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, pulled up to a gated entrance. A guard in a navy uniform stepped forward, checked her ID, and nodded the driver through. She couldn't stop staring. The lawn was perfect, the trees manicured, the fountain at the front glistening with soft water arcs. For a moment, she forgot what she was here for. Ms. Lane, a woman greeted her as soon as she stepped out. This one was different from the assistant at the office. Older. Warmer. She wore a crisp blazer and a friendly smile. I'm Martha. I'll be managing your transition. Transition? Sophie echoed. To your new life, at least for the next year. Sophie nodded, clutching her purse like it was a shield. Right. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and something faintly floral. Everything was white and wood and glass, elegant but somehow hollow, like a model home no one actually lived in. Martha led her through a grand hallway toward a private suite. This is your wing. You'll have your own entrance, kitchen, private nurse on call, and staff for anything you need. You won't be expected to interact with Mr. Wolf unless invited. Unless invited? Sophie repeated, stopping short. Martha turned. He values privacy. Especially now. And what if I need to talk to him? Martha hesitated, then smiled kindly. Then knock. That night. Sophie lay awake in a king-sized bed with soft sheets she wasn't used to. Everything was too quiet. No city noise, no sirens, no neighbors fighting through paper-thin walls. Just stillness. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Alexander Wolf. His eyes. That wheelchair. The way he spoke. Like every word cost him something. She didn't know what had happened to him, but it had cut deep. Not just physically. And now, she was going to carry his children. Her hand moved over her belly, still flat beneath her cotton nightgown. It was surreal. The procedure hadn't even begun, and already she felt, tethered to something larger than herself. Sophie rolled onto her side and whispered into the darkness. "What are you hiding, Alexander Wolf?" The sunlight streamed through the high windows like soft gold, filtering through sheer curtains and bathing Sophie's room in a warm glow. She blinked awake slowly, disoriented by the quiet and the luxury. No rusted pipes creaking. No early morning shouting. No baby crying through a paper-thin wall. Just peace. For a moment, she let herself pretend it was hers. Then she remembered. The surrogacy. The contract she hadn't yet signed. The man downstairs. Alexander Wolf. Sophie sat up slowly and stretched. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach. Flat for now, but it would change. A gentle knock came at the door. She slid out of bed and opened it to find Martha, the house manager, holding a silver breakfast tray. "Good morning, Ms. Lane," she said with a practiced smile. "I hope you slept well." "I did. Thank you." Sophie stepped aside to let her in. Martha set the tray down on a side table. "Dr. Bassi will arrive in 2 hours to conduct your preliminary medicals. We'll begin prepping for the embryo transfer by the end of the week, if everything checks out." Sophie hesitated. "And Mr. Wolf?" "He's asked not to be disturbed." Of course, he had. Martha's smile softened a little, as if she could read Sophie's thoughts. "He keeps to himself, but he's watching." Quietly. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Watching how?" "Not literally. But this house has rules." "His rules. He's making sure you follow them." Sophie gave a slow nod. "And if I don't?" "You won't be here long," Martha said, gently but firmly. Later that morning, Sophie was escorted to a sleek, state-of-the-art medical room tucked into the west wing of the house. It didn't feel like a hospital, more like a private wellness retreat. Everything gleamed with sterile perfection. A tall, confident woman in a white coat turned as Sophie entered. "You must be Sophie," she said, offering a warm hand. "I'm Dr. Bassi. I'll be overseeing your care." "Nice to meet you," Sophie said, shaking it. The doctor's grip was firm, reassuring. "You're healthy, based on your file," Dr. Bassi said as she flipped through a digital tablet. "But we'll do a full workup. Blood tests. Ultrasound. Psych eval. Mr. Wolf is thorough." "I noticed." That made the doctor smile. "Have you decided whether to proceed?" Sophie swallowed. "Yes." "You've signed the contract?" "Not yet." Dr. Bassi studied her face for a moment. "Then I'll have the notary brought in after your tests." "No rush. But once the embryos are transferred, there's no going back." "I know." And she did. Or at least she thought she did. The sun was setting by the time Sophie returned to her suite. Her arm ached from blood draws, her head buzzed from all the medical talk. Twins. That word kept circling her thoughts like a tide. Twins for a man she didn't know. Twins she'd never raise. Twins that would tie her, forever, to someone who didn't believe in love, only control. Her suite was quiet again. The light dimmed to a honeyed glow across polished wood floors. She noticed a folder on the coffee table. Cream-colored. Heavy paper. Gold lettering. She sat on the couch and opened it. Pages of legal text. Clauses. Schedules. Stipends. The severance payout. Confidentiality terms. Custody transfers. Her eyes scanned until she hit a handwritten note slipped between the pages. You have one decision left to make. After that, your life changes forever. A.W. She stared at the note for a long time, her heartbeat steady but loud in her ears. Then she pulled out a pen. And signed. The contract was signed. The ink had barely dried before Sophie felt the invisible shift, as if the house itself now recognized her presence with more purpose. Staff moved with a quiet deference around her. Martha's tone became more formal. And still, Alexander remained unseen. 3 days passed. The medical team came and went with clinical precision. Sophie underwent hormone treatments and pre-transfer protocols in the estate's private clinic. Dr. Bassi was kind and patient, always explaining everything. But outside the sterile calm of medical appointments, Sophie was alone. No phone. No TV. No internet. Just books, long walks around the estate gardens, and silence. It was the quiet that got to her most. The twilight sky cast a silver hue over the estate grounds as Sophie stood by the railing of the west terrace, her sweater wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The scent of hibiscus and wet earth lingered in the air. She looked up at the stars, longing for someone to talk to. Someone who didn't want her womb, but her voice. You're up late. She startled at the deep voice behind her. Turning, she saw him, Alexander Wolf, half-shadowed in the warm glow spilling from the house. He was dressed in a charcoal sweater and black slacks, his chair nearly silent as it rolled across the smooth stone. In the soft light, he looked tired. Human. Less fortress, more man. I couldn't sleep, Sophie replied. Too quiet. You'll get used to it. I hope not. That made him pause. You don't like silence. I like peace. This feels more like isolation. He studied her. It's safer this way. Safe for whom? She asked. Alexander didn't answer right away. He wheeled closer and parked beside her, both of them staring out at the garden. A long silence passed, this one less hostile. You signed faster than I thought you would, he said. I didn't do it for the money. That caught his attention. He turned toward her. No. I did it because I wanted to matter. Even for a little while. He blinked, then looked away. You'll matter more than you realize. Sophie tilted her head. Is that a compliment or a warning? He almost smiled. Both. Back in her room, Sophie stood by the window for a long time, staring at the same garden where they'd just spoken. The interaction had been brief. But it cracked something. Not just in Alexander. In her, too. For the first time, she wondered not just what he had lost, but who he had been before he built this cage of silence around himself. And for the first time, she wanted to know the man behind the money. Not because she was carrying his children, but because something inside her had started to care. The procedure was scheduled for Thursday. It was Monday. Sophie sat quietly on the exam table, wrapped in a thin cotton robe. The private clinic was bathed in soft white light, as if calm could be manufactured. Dr. Bassi stood near the monitor, tapping notes onto a digital tablet. Your hormone levels are right on target. We'll proceed as planned unless you have second thoughts. I signed the contract, Sophie said softly. Yes, the doctor replied, glancing at her. But this is more than a contract. It's a commitment. Emotionally. Physically. For some, spiritually. Sophie looked down at her hands. They were shaking, just a little. Dr. Bassi's expression softened. It's okay to be nervous. I'm not nervous about the procedure. I'm nervous about what happens after. Dr. Bassi nodded slowly, then gently said, you don't just walk away the same person, Sophie. No matter what anyone promises. Sophie found herself in the library. It was easily the most lived-in room in the house, shelves stacked with books of all kinds, from business texts to poetry. The fireplace had been recently used. A chess board sat mid-game on the corner table. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books. The titles surprised her, Neruda, Achebe, Adichie. Not just numbers and logic, but emotion. She turned when she heard him. Alexander. His wheelchair rolled softly on the wooden floor. He wore a black turtleneck and slacks today. His sleeves were pushed up to his elbows. I didn't peg you as a poetry reader, she said. He raised a brow. You assumed I only read contracts. You don't exactly give soft energy. Alexander wheeled closer, stopping beside her. I liked poetry before the accident. She studied him carefully. And after? He was quiet a moment. After, everything felt too loud. Even words. Sophie nodded slowly. That's exactly how silence feels to me. Their eyes met, not sharp this time, but searching. Do you regret signing? He asked her suddenly. She didn't answer right away. I don't regret it. I think I'm just starting to realize the weight of it. He nodded. So am I. The room was quiet but clinical. Machines beeped softly. A nurse placed a warm blanket over Sophie's legs as she lay on the reclining bed. Dr. Bassi stood ready, calm and confident. 2 embryos will be transferred today, she said gently. High chance of twins. Sophie nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. The lights dimmed slightly as the procedure began. It was painless, more symbolic than physical. But she felt everything. The tension in her body. The fear. The hope. The choice. Somewhere between breath and heartbeat, she closed her eyes. And let go. Later that evening. Alexander knocked once before entering her suite. It was the first time he'd done so. She was lying on the couch, covered in a soft blanket, tea half drunk on the table. I heard everything went well, he said. It did. He moved closer, slowly. You look tired. I feel full. He nodded. That's the hormones. And the responsibility. She laughed softly. You're terrible at comfort. I've never had to be good at it. Silence. Then she looked at him, tired but sincere. They're in there now, you know. Your children. Alexander's expression changed, barely, but meaningfully. He moved to her side, not touching her, just close. And for the first time, Sophie didn't feel like just the surrogate. She felt like someone. The morning after the transfer, Sophie awoke with a strange weight in her chest, not pain, not regret, just gravity. Everything felt heavier now. She lay in bed longer than usual, her hand resting on her stomach, already imagining the changes happening inside. She wasn't sure if it was maternal instinct, hormones, or something more, something ancient, unspoken. A life was beginning. 2, maybe. And she was the center of it all. In the garden. She found herself back in the garden that afternoon, the place where silence felt less like punishment and more like meditation. The flowers smelled different now. The sunlight felt warmer. Or maybe she was simply seeing everything differently. Alexander was already there. He was parked under a large jacaranda tree, a book resting in his lap. Not business. Not finance. Wole Soyinka. Sophie raised an eyebrow as she approached. Still surprising me. He didn't look up. I like complexity. You could just say you like poetry. He smirked. That would be too easy. She took a seat on the bench beside him, not too close. Just enough. They sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "Have you changed your mind yet? About the babies? About me?" That made her pause. "I haven't made up my mind about you yet." A faint twitch of amusement touched his lips. "Good. Most people decide too fast. I don't think you give people much time to figure you out." He closed the book. "I used to. Before." She looked at him. Really looked. "What happened to you, Alexander?" His jaw tightened. "That's a long story. I'm here. I'm not ready." She nodded once. "Then don't expect me to trust a ghost." His gaze met hers. Not angry. Not defensive. Just seen. Sophie had started eating meals in the main dining room. It was always set for one, but sometimes, he joined her. They didn't talk much. But they didn't need to. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, she stood to leave when his voice stopped her. "Sophie." She turned. "You're not just the surrogate. I hope you know that." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "Why are you telling me that now?" He looked down at his hands. "Because for the first time, I think I believe it myself." Sophie felt different. It was subtle at first, a deeper fatigue, a faint tightening in her body, a strange awareness of herself she hadn't known before. The embryos had implanted. Life, fragile, miraculous life, was quietly beginning. The estate staff moved around her with the same careful professionalism, but Sophie noticed the small things, the housekeeper making her ginger tea for her nausea without asking, the nurse checking her vitals but giving her space. Alexander noticed too. In the library. She found him there again, days late. A place that had become their unspoken meeting ground. He wasn't reading this time. He was just sitting by the window, staring out over the misty gardens. She hesitated at the doorway. "You can come in," he said without turning. Sophie entered and sat across from him, the quiet stretching easily between them. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Strange. Tired." "That's good." She tilted her head. "Good. Means they're growing. Means you're doing your part." The clinical way he said it made her bristle slightly, but before she could respond, he added, "And it means you're not alone anymore." The words hung there, heavier than any silence. She swallowed. "You're not either." He glanced at her, and for a heartbeat, she saw it, the man he was before. Before the chair. Before the walls. A week later, Dr. Bassi set up the first ultrasound. Sophie lay back on the reclined chair, the cold gel making her flinch slightly as the wand pressed against her abdomen. Alexander was there. Not hovering, but present. The screen flickered, grainy and ghost-like, until two tiny shapes appeared. Two flickering heartbeats. Sophie stared, unable to breathe. "They're small," Dr. Bassi said softly. "But strong." Alexander leaned forward slightly, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair tightly. Two heartbeats. Two lives. Sophie glanced at him. For the first time, she saw his hand tremble. When the doctor printed the first photo and handed it to Sophie, Alexander didn't ask for it. But he didn't look away either. She found a small envelope slipped under her suite door. Inside was the ultrasound printout, a second copy, and a note. "They're more than contracts now. A.W." Sophie pressed the photo to her chest. And smiled. The weeks blurred into one another. Sophie's world became a steady rhythm of doctor's appointments, walks in the garden, and increasingly quiet evenings spent with Alexander. He wasn't a man of many words, but Sophie had learned that sometimes the greatest conversations happened in silence. Their connection grew in the unsaid. In the simple way he would have tea waiting for her when she finished her walks. In the soft knock on her door before dinner. In the way his gaze lingered a little longer on her belly, as if reassuring himself the lives inside were still there. The sunset painted the sky in molten gold and indigo. Sophie sat curled up on a cushioned chair on the terrace, cradling a cup of ginger tea. Alexander rolled up beside her, a blanket draped over his lap, his expression calm but watchful. "They'll start kicking soon," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "How can you tell?" "I just know." He turned his chair slightly, facing the horizon. "When I was a boy," he said after a long pause, "I used to think the stars were windows." He gave a soft, humorless laugh. Freedom. Movement. The impossible. She swallowed, feeling the ache in his words. "You still have a life," she said gently. "Not the one I wanted." "Maybe," she said, "but maybe it's the one that will matter more." For a long time, neither of them spoke. It happened one quiet afternoon. Sophie was reading in the library, legs curled under her on the couch, a soft cardigan draped around her shoulders. Alexander was across the room, pretending to be absorbed in a book but glancing at her far more often than at the pages. She felt it, a soft flutter, barely noticeable, but undeniable. She gasped and pressed a hand to her belly. "What is it?" Alexander asked, instantly alert. She smiled wide. "They kicked." He froze. "Here," she said, standing carefully and crossing the room. She guided his hand, firm, calloused, to the spot just below her navel. At first, nothing. Then, a faint thump against his palm. Alexander's eyes widened. His hand tightened slightly, and for a moment he closed his eyes, as if imprinting the sensation into memory. "They're real," he whispered. "They always were." His hand stayed there longer than necessary. Neither of them mentioned it when she stepped back. But neither of them forgot. As Sophie settled into bed, she found another note slipped under her door. "Thank you for not giving up on the impossible. A.W." She smiled into the dark, hand resting protectively on her stomach. Maybe impossible things just took a little longer. The weather changed before Sophie even noticed it. A heavy storm rolled in late one evening, clouds churning, wind bending the trees outside the estate. Thunder cracked overhead as sheets of rain battered the windows. Inside the estate, it was warm and quiet, too quiet. Sophie stood by her window, one hand resting on her growing stomach. She had grown used to the hush of the house, the slow rhythm of days blending into each other, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the silence felt like waiting. A knock at the door. It came soft, tentative. Sophie opened the door to find Alexander there, dressed in a simple sweater and dark pants, his hair slightly mussed, his expression unreadable. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "The storm," he said simply. She gestured for him to come in, stepping aside. Without a word, he wheeled in, stopping by the window to watch the rain smear the night into watercolor blurs. "I used to like storms," he said quietly. "Before the accident." Sophie sat on the armrest of the couch, watching him. "What changed?" He didn't answer for a long time. "After you lose control of your body," he said finally, "you start to hate anything you can't predict." The vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. "You're allowed to hate it," she said softly. "But it said. Otherwise, what's the point?" He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face shifted, a crack in the armor he wore so well. With a sudden pop, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Sophie gasped, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. Alexander moved immediately. "Stay there," he said. She heard him wheeling closer in the dark, the soft mechanical sound oddly comforting. "I'm fine," she said, voice steadier than she felt. His hand brushed hers, grounding her. Hold on, he murmured. A few seconds later, a flashlight clicked on. Its beam cut through the dark, making the shadows dance across the walls. He handed it to her, their fingers grazing briefly. She shivered, and not from the cold. They sat on the couch, the flashlight propped between them, casting their faces in half-shadows. The rain battered the windows harder now, thunder rolling closer. For a long time, they said nothing. Then Alexander spoke, voice low. When I woke up in the hospital, they told me I'd never walk again. That I'd never feel the same things. Sophie didn't move, didn't breathe. I didn't believe them. For a long time, I thought, if I just worked harder, if I just refused to accept it. He trailed off, staring into the dark. It wasn't the chair that broke me, he said after a while. It was realizing that no amount of willpower could change the truth. Sophie reached out slowly, her fingers finding his. She squeezed. I don't care about the chair, she said. He looked at her, really looked, and for once, there was no guarded wall behind his eyes. Just a man. Just Alexander. The storm raged on, but inside, the world had stilled. Sophie lay on the couch, her head resting against Alexander's shoulder. His arm was awkward around her at first, but gradually, he relaxed into it. They sat like that, not as a billionaire and a surrogate, not as two broken people. But simply as two souls finding shelter in each other. Days after the storm, life inside the Wolf estate settled back into its familiar quiet rhythm, but something between Sophie and Alexander had shifted. They no longer needed excuses to spend time together. He would find her in the garden, and they would sit side by side under the jacaranda tree. She would knock gently on his office door in the evenings, a silent invitation for a walk through the halls or tea by the fire. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't even spoken aloud. It was just there, an invisible thread tying them closer with each day. The nursery. One afternoon, as the sun filtered soft and golden through the high windows, Sophie found a room she hadn't seen before, the nursery. It was unfinished, bare walls and unpacked boxes stacked against the far side. A rocking chair sat by the window, empty, the only piece of furniture assembled. Alexander found her standing there, her hand brushing over the arm of the chair. I forgot about this room, he said quietly. She turned to him. You had it built? He nodded. Before the accident. Before everything. Why haven't you finished it? His lips pressed together in a tight line. I wasn't sure I ever would. Sophie walked further in, her hand moving over the smooth wood of the chair, the cool metal of the empty crib still boxed on the floor. Well, she said softly, it looks like it's waiting for something. Or someone. He studied her, something heavy and unreadable in his gaze. Or someone, he echoed. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. The babies kicked more often now, tiny thuds reminding her of their presence. But her mind raced with worries she hadn't dared voice. Would they be healthy? Would she really be able to let them go when the time came? Would Alexander still want her around when her part was done? She sat in the dim light of her suite, a hand on her belly, when she heard it, the soft whir of wheels against marble. Alexander. He didn't knock this time, just pushed the door open and waited. I couldn't sleep, she said before he could ask. Without a word, he rolled further in, stopping just a few feet away. What are you afraid of? He asked gently. Her throat tightened. Of losing them. Of losing this. He didn't move closer, but his voice softened. You're not going to lose them. She blinked, tears brimming but not falling. How do you know? Because they have you. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Alexander rolled forward and lifted his hand. It hovered for a second, uncertain, trembling, and then rested gently, protectively, over hers. Their hands, warm and steady, lay atop the curve of her belly. The babies kicked, and Alexander's eyes widened. This time, he smiled, not the guarded, polite smile she was used to, but something real. Something bright and rare. Something alive. The morning was still when it happened. No drama, no fanfare. Just the quiet realization that Sophie's body was ready. She stood by the window, hand cradling the growing weight of her belly, and felt the first real contraction, a deep, slow ache that gripped her center and refused to let go. It was time. Within minutes, Martha was at her side, calm and efficient. The estate's private clinic was already prepared. Alexander was waiting when she arrived, sitting by the bed with a stillness that belied the tension in his frame. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Sophie gritted her teeth as another contraction hit, stronger this time. Sweat dampened her brow, and she focused on her breathing, on the steady presence of the man beside her. "You're doing great," Alexander said quietly. His hand found hers, steady, firm, grounding her through the waves of pain. Hours blurred together. Breaths. Cries. Shouts of encouragement. The sharp scent of antiseptic and the warm hand gripping hers. And then. 2 cries. Sharp. Clear. Strong. Sophie's head fell back against the pillow, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. Relief, exhaustion, joy, all tangled into something indescribable. Dr. Bassi smiled as she gently handed the first tiny, wriggling bundle to Sophie. A boy. Moments later, the second. A girl. Sophie looked down at them, marveling at the perfect, impossible life she cradled in her arms. She glanced at Alexander, who was staring at the babies as if the world had just cracked open and spilled every secret he'd ever wanted to know. The next day, Sophie sat in the nursery, now finished, painted soft cream with the scent of fresh wood in the air. Alexander wheeled in quietly. She handed him the baby boy first, carefully guiding the small body into his arms. His hands shook, but he didn't look away. He pulled the baby close, breathing in, holding on. Then she handed him the girl. "She looks like you," Sophie said softly. Alexander didn't respond. He just stared at the tiny face, his thumb brushing over the soft cheek, his expression raw with wonder. Sophie stood at the estate's entrance, a small bag slung over her shoulder. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the manicured lawns. Alexander rolled up beside her, silent. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't planned it or rehearsed it. It just was. "Thank you," he said finally, voice low and rough. She smiled through the ache in her chest. "Take care of them." "I will." A beat of silence. Then he said, "Stay." The word hung there, a fragile, impossible thing. Sophie's breath caught. "You don't have to disappear," he added, softer this time. "You never did." Slowly, carefully, Sophie nodded. Not just because of the babies. Not just because of him. Because somewhere between the silences and storms, the loneliness and the laughter, she had found something she didn't think she deserved. A home. Years later, in the same garden beneath the jacaranda tree, Alexander watched as 2 small children chased each other through the blossoms, laughter ringing out like music. Beside him, Sophie sat with a book open on her lap, the afternoon sun catching the gold in her hair. He reached over, lacing his fingers through hers. And for the first time in a long time, Alexander Wolf believed in impossible things. Because some miracles don't come all at once. Some miracles arrive quietly, on a rainy night, with a soft knock on a door, and stay. Forever. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more. Thank you.